today. This is part 3 of 5 of our summer talks series. And today we're hoping to focus on discussing PAC's influence in elections and female candidate support in order to analyze the role that money plays in elections and what donors and individuals can do to help support women running for office. And if anyone, needs to get off at any point, we have been recording all of the sessions and they will be on our YouTube channel. But as long as you are registered, then everyone will receive the link either tomorrow or Thursday for the recording. So my name is Nicole. I am a rising senior at Swarthmore College. I am one of the outreach and advocacy interns for Represent Women for the summer. And I think we have all of our panelists. So if everyone just kind of wants to go around and introduce themselves, your title, organization, how you're connected to Represent Women, and then we can dive in.
Hi, I'm Laura Riley. I'm the Represent Women Research Fellow, and I have kind of spearheaded the PAC report for 2020. So my limited expertise is there.
Hello, I am Corinne Bennett. I am a current research intern with Represent Women. I am also a current master's student at Johns Hopkins School of International Studies, SICE. So excited to share some of the work that I've been doing over the summer with Represent Women and talking about PACs today.
My name is Sarah Briner. I'm the research director at Center for Responsive Politics, also known as OpenSecrets.org. We've been researching gender and money in politics for a long time, and have recently started integrating data on candidate race as well. So I'm excited to talk about all of our work in that area, and I'm happy to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Rena Shaw, and I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm a Republican strategist of many years. Prior to that, I was working on Capitol Hill for 2 Republican members of Congress. Women's political empowerment engagement has been really, really close to my heart. To that end, I'm on the board of directors of Represent Women. Very proud to be part of the efforts for the past few years. And I wear a few different other hats. I'm the co-founder of Women's Public Leadership Network, and I'm on the boards of Republican Women for Progress, Vote Run Lead, as well as Running Start. So I love giving my time to the effort of getting more women involved in politics. My PAC experience is pretty extensive on the Republican side. I've really enjoyed some of the hats I've worn there as well. And so looking forward to the conversation and sharing some of those experiences with you all.
Well, thank you all for joining us today and bringing your expertise and backgrounds, which I believe will be very helpful for today's talk on PACs. I think the general outline for this webinar is going to be going over our recent findings for the 2020 PAC report, which all the data was graciously given to us from Center for Responsive Politics Open Secrets project. And then everyone can just hop in where their expertise and experience really benefits the conversation and moves it forward. So starting out, the background is money continues to play a huge role in our politics, and that's unlikely to change in the near future. So it's definitely a system we have to continue to grapple with and work with so that it benefits women candidates the way it's benefiting male candidates. The amount of money raised by a candidate and the depth of their individual donor lists are often used as the early benchmarks for candidates' viability and electability. And even this year, it was used as one of the main reasons a candidate got on the debate stage for the Democratic primaries. So since it's such an important concept and part of our electoral system, it's something we really do need to understand how it affects women, and then also figure out how we can change it or manipulate it so that it helps women more. So just starting off, what is a PAC? It's a political committee organized for the purpose of raising and spending money to elect or defeat candidates. There's quite a few different PACs. There's leadership PACs, membership PACs, and the like. They are organized around political interests or organizations, or sometimes just a leader in Congress. But I was hoping, Sarah, you could talk about kind of what PACs are and why it's so important to record what they give and make that accessible to the voting public, which is something Open Secrets has been doing for years now.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to address those questions. So when we are talking about PACs, particularly in this context, generally, I think what we're looking at here is political committees, like Maura said, that are allowed to receive money from individual people. And those donation limits are capped in most cases, so you can only give $5,000 to the PAC. And you can only give money to the PAC if you're affiliated with the same organization that the PAC is affiliated, in most cases. And there are certainly exceptions to both of those restrictions, and I'll get into those in a moment. But you can imagine, for example, if you work for Comcast, and Comcast sets up a PAC, the PAC is supposed to represent Comcast's interests and donate to candidates who Comcast believes will work in their interest as well. So the employees fund the political action committee, and the political arm of Comcast determines where that money is allocated. It's all capped. Candidates can only receive a certain amount from PACs, from a specific PAC. And so if you look at Open Secrets, and I'm going to share a link in the chat in one moment, once I pull it up, you can see here that, one second, if you click on the total, if you see the total raised total to candidates chart on this page, the total amount given to candidates has actually been flat, more or less, since around 2002, and that's because PACs are limited in the amount of money that they can give to candidates, and that is not tied to inflation. But you can also see that PACs have raised more and more and more every cycle, and that's because those numbers include what have now famously been called super PACs. And super PACs are a different entity than political action committees, and I don't believe that that's the focus of this conversation. But a super PAC does not have to abide by the restrictions of a PAC. It can receive money from anyone or anything, so long as it's a domestic entity, and so long as that data is disclosed to our Federal Election Commission, and it is not allowed to donate money to candidates. So what these super PACs do, rather than making donations, is run expensive political advertisements supporting their opposing candidates. So that's why we've seen PACs raising more and more and more. That's because super PACs are included, but the amount that candidates have been getting from PACs has remained steady cycle by cycle because of limits on what PACs can donate. What's interesting about this, though, too, is that there's kind of a push and pull dynamic with PACs right now, where many candidates, particularly Democratic challengers, have been, quote unquote, rejecting PAC money. The sort of impact of that is probably less than I think a lot of people might assume that it is, because political action committees generally don't give money to challengers anyway. They tend to support incumbents, and incumbents tend to not be the people rejecting PAC money. So, you know, I do think that that's interesting. You do have famous examples of like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, rejecting PAC money, and she's an incumbent. But generally, most candidates do receive PAC money. It's important because it is not subject to the same kind of fluctuations that individual donations are. PACs are pretty steady in their giving. It's kind of a reliable source of funds for most incumbents. And I think that that's, and it's a little bit easier to raise in some ways if you're a DC based politician, because they kind of know who you are. They come to you, whereas individual donors, in many cases, you have to seek out to raise that money. So although PAC money is a small portion of the pie, it's an important portion of the pie for most incumbents.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna share a quick graph which shows just the levels of PAC giving that we found in the 2018 election cycle. And the fact that PACs are pretty non-discriminate in if they're giving to a male or female incumbent. They give pretty much on average, as you can see, the average to a male incumbent or a male candidate was 33,631, and to a female candidate it was 3,619. Where the biggest difference comes in is the total number of candidates donated to. The majority are male, and therefore that makes up 74% of PAC giving, at least in the 2018 cycle, and that I don't believe has really changed that much in recent elections. The problem with overfunding incumbents is the majority of incumbents right now are white men. So even when they give evenly to incumbents, they are, without knowing it or with knowing it, over giving to men at the cost of giving to women candidates. So the problem with favoring incumbents is our system already favors them. So it is just compounding upon the name recognition of what incumbency is. Corinne, I was hoping you've created some great case studies for our PAC project, which you can find on our website, that looked into PACs from I think Google, Twitter, Johnson & Johnson, Disney, iHeartRadio, and really broke down how much they gave to men and women and Republicans and Democrats. I was wondering if you could go over a couple of those and just see what trends you found in that.
Absolutely. So this has actually been one of my most favorite projects so far that I've done for Represent Women this summer. I've been able to work with a lot of data, as you can imagine, and Excel, and of course, Infogram to create the graphics that Maura that she talked about, which you can find on Represent Women's website. And it's just been really interesting to kind of follow the money and see where each of these PACs are donating and how much. In particular, it was interesting to see, not only did I look at PAC funding, but I also looked at the gender balance in the board makeup of these organizations as well, to see what that entailed. So that was fascinating. But in all of the case studies that I did, the one thing that was constant was Republican women in particular were funded the least. They were always the lowest amount in all of the case studies that I did for all of the PACs. And of course, as Maura mentioned as well, men were always funded more than women overall in terms of how many men were funded. So for example, I looked into Coca-Cola as well as Pepsi, but Coca-Cola spent $338,000 less on female candidates, both Democratic women candidates and Republican women candidates. And their averages being, they donated about $3,300 per female candidate as compared to $3,800 for the male candidates. And then for eBay, that was also an interesting case study that I looked at. They funded more Democratic men, however, more Republican men got more money. So while they were giving money to more Democratic male candidates, they spent $51,000 to Republican men versus the $33,000 to Democratic men. But then on the flip side of that, they funded more Democratic women, $15,000 compared to Republican women, which was only $7,000. And what was also mentioned was most of the donations that these PACs gave to were to incumbents. So challenger candidates were funded by far the least amount. So that was also kind of a fascinating look into that as well.
And of course, challengers and open seat candidates are more likely to be women and people of color, as opposed to incumbents who are, of course, more likely to be white and male. And it looks like we have a question in the chat section asking, were Republican women funded less because there were fewer of them? That is certainly part of the problem, is the number of Republican women who made it out of their primaries in 2018 did drop significantly, so fewer were being funded in the general election. Rena, I was wondering, did you have anything to add to that as to why these problems are worse for Republican women?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the breadth of my experience, one thing that I've seen as true is that the early money that is really needed for a woman to succeed and really make her place in a primary is lacking from the very few Republican PACs that exist. I started my career on Capitol Hill over a decade ago, and at that time, the influence of money was very obvious to me when, as a sort of the second in command in the office, my job was to literally hold my boss's hand and take him across the street and make sure he didn't leave a cubicle at the NRCC where he was dialing for dollars. That was very shocking to me as somebody that had been politically engaged for a number of years, always been really interested in politics and civic life. That money that congressman was raising, and what I saw in the 2 years I worked for that particular congressman was that PAC money was the best money. And that was really tough to swallow because for me, a big part of why I came into Republican politics, and I'm still a conservative, is because I really believe in the power of the individual. And I've always thought that grassroots, that individual donation should carry more weight. But this is the system we have today. And I don't believe that the Republican Party, because of sort of ideology, has set up a successful structure for Republican female candidates to succeed across the country. And that's really where the problem begins. Is this unwillingness to rise to the moment, the day, and say that we ought to play identity politics in some way. Otherwise, we're going to be at a loss. So I would say, fast forward from my Capitol Hill experience into figuring out where I wanted to be politically. I became a political operative in 2011, and as an operative, you see a lot of things in this town. And one of those things is that some great parties are funded by some of the PACs that were named early on, iHeartRadio, things like that. These parties are really meant to entice these candidates as well as the sitting elected officials into having the conversations with those higher ups in these political action committees. And when we say political action committee, it's very important to break it down because the action that a lot of these PACs want, if not the overwhelming number of them, is to keep that incumbent there so they can do a particular action for them that benefits them. And I think when women understand that and figure out where you want to play with PACs, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, or you may be feeling quite very much in the middle, I love the phrase radical centrist, then you can figure out how do you want to play. So for me, I knew the games in town were View PAC, value in electing women. That's important. That's what they stood for. Wolf PAC was very influential in its beginning. That was Women Under 40 PAC, and that's founded by a fellow, I believe she's one of the founders at early board member, Susanna Running Start, who's also a board member at Represent Women. Wolf PAC was great because I'm still under 40, and I knew about it a while ago, but they were bipartisan. And I still think that that's what they're going for. But Maggie's List, Right Now Women PAC, which was sort of formed in the newer era, and I was a part of the founders circle there. And then there was Women to Women, the Republican Main Street Partnership. Sarah Chamberlain was their head. She created Women to Women PAC. I've just named them all in just 30 seconds. So it's really very quite sad that the sources of money for Republican women have been so few. To that end, I helped co-found Catalyst PAC last year, and that was with the hope that we could fund really those identity candidates, looking at gay candidates, looking at women of color, looking at religious and other sort of diversities. That's what the aim was there. I'm no longer involved there. I was the treasurer, and then I've since moved on since the beginning of this year. But that was the aim. What I found in Republican circles is that this is just not palatable. The idea that it's important to elect more women to get a critical mass at the table of Republican women so that the quote unquote bad ones could weed themselves out, that just doesn't seem like it's something that men in the Republican Party are dedicated to. So it remains this very small circle of women over and over again that essentially reward incumbency.
Absolutely. Yeah, going into the PACs that are really geared towards intentional action, I think along with the View PAC, what really comes to people's minds is Emily's List, which actually has been quite successful in increasing the number of Democratic women to be elected within the caucus. And that is because they have such a large financial base to fund their candidates. But they also, unlike most PACs, don't fund as many incumbents as they do challengers and open seat candidates, which make up the bulk of their giving, especially in 2018. And you can see the benefits for the Democratic women which is more challengers and women in open seats were elected. And part of the problem is VPAC does have a smaller financial base. Do you have any ideas on how we encourage women across the political spectrum to really start donating to both PACs and candidates, and kind of emphasize the fact that this is part of their political voice along with voting?
So that question's for me, is that right? Okay, sure. Well, I'll just kick it off real quick, and I'll keep it short in that I really do believe, for me, getting involved with a variety of PACs, so becoming a founding member, giving a certain amount of money to help join the founder circle of Right Now Women PAC, that was interesting to me, because I knew a few women on Capitol Hill that were former staffers like me that were like, sort of, hey, we ought to create this sort of modern giving mechanism to Republican candidates that we believe really ought to have a place in the nation's capital, that we had felt like some of the groups were very antiquated because they were being led by women that were far and above older than us. And Maggie's List, you'll see their membership. This is a very older generation, and there's nothing wrong with that. I certainly don't mean to be ageist in any way. It's that the younger crop of conservative women have always felt this fundamental disconnect with their liberal peers, right? And because it's the left supports women so well that early money is like yeast. That sense that if we invest in a woman now, she becomes something very soon later. But I think for me, when I was on Right Now Women PAC, the intentional action we talk about and that can be sort of promulgated from those of us who are involved and want to bring more women to the table across the country in a variety of ways. I'm involved with a number of groups. To anybody listening that wants to connect and talk about some of the groups I'm involved in outside of Represent Women that help get women acquainted with what it takes to run for office and different things like that. The intentional action really is to say, let's invest in women like startups. And that's what I did as a director of candidate engagement with Right Now Women PAC. I would bring pretty much every woman's case that I met. In 2017, I met every single woman that was a candidate for congressional office that was a Republican from across the country. They would all fly to Washington with their hand out. And of course, I'm the face of the PAC, who they should meet with and explain to me why they deserve the check. And so then I go back to my board and I made the case that I really believe this woman is, for this reason, we should give her this much money. And the problem is that there were so many that we wanted to fund, but there was not a litmus test. And I think that is also a tough part, is the anti-abortion and the pro-choice segments in the Republican Party. It's certainly not very Big Tent right now. And that becomes part of the litmus test for some of these Republican groups. That's not something we should shy away from. It's a very difficult conversation to have. A lot of women are single issue voters in the Republican Party because they're so anti-abortion. That is the major issue. That's why they're in the party. So that is a tough thing for us to address as Republican women when there is that litmus test and nothing else.
Absolutely. Does anyone have anything else to add on how we encourage all women to start giving to PACs and early on in the game, because it has been shown that the money matters most in primaries, and getting women out of their primaries and to win their primaries so that they can actually face the general election, where districts are more likely to be almost predetermined by makeup and ideological ideas. Sarah, I know you wanted to talk about how the increasing women's representation and the increasing diversity within the candidate pool in 2018 and 2020 and going forward.
Yes, I'd like to share with you and the panelists a recent report that we put out about these issues. Certainly less focused on PACs than the conversation has been so far, but that does come up. But one of the things that has constantly sort of troubled and perplexed me is the fact that we actually, especially this cycle, do have a fairly diverse candidate pool, both racially and on gender lines. CRP has been contacting candidates of all genders to ask them what their racial identification is for the last 4 years or last 2 years. And so we have pretty comprehensive data on candidate race. We find that you have to ask people what their race is. You can't just assume based on what they look like, which is what people have done in the past. So it's a little bit more labor intensive, but this cycle, I think we were struck at how diverse, particularly the Republican field of women in particular is, including those who make it out of their primary. And so you've probably seen reporting from 538 and other outlets about how diverse the Republican Party is going to be, but that's completely not true because, or the Republican candidate group will be, because most of those candidates are running in districts that favor Democrats by 30 points. So they're both raising no money and they have very little chance of actually winning. And why this is the case, and I think there's a lot of different explanations for this problem. One of which is that the districts that favor Democrats by such large margins tend to be more racially diverse, urban districts. And so the type of candidate who's running from either party is going to fit that demographic a little bit more likely than running in a sort of all-white rural district. So there are sort of geographic and structural reasons why this is happening that are not kind of nefarious or related to money. But I do think that saying that the Republican candidate pool is more diverse than it ever has been in the past, is both true and also incredibly misleading. Because when we look at the 117th Congress and who's likely to be serving in it, it looks a lot like the 116th Congress. Although on the Republican side, we do see that the candidates who are running to replace retiring Republicans, and there's a lot of them this cycle, a lot of Republican white men are not running again. They tend to be white, but they are more likely to be women than in previous cycles. So I think we will see a slight tick up in the number of Republican women in the 117th, but not the number of people of color, women of color serving in the Republican Party. So I think that that's kind of interesting when you look at this. And we talk about some of these issues and reasons in this report. I think the money questions, it's a little bit early in the cycle to address that because all districts are so different from each other. And it's hard to do kind of case analysis of districts because some races are just more expensive than others, and we won't kind of know how the chips fall until November. But I do think that it's interesting to consider. And in this report, we do have a sheet that you can pull up that shows the races that had been the primaries that had been completed by mid-June, and what the member of Congress serving that district looks like now, who it is, what race they are, what gender they are, and then what's likely to happen in the 117th. And of course, that's subject to change, but one of the things that people who work in politics know is that it's subject to change, but not that much change. Incumbents vastly win their contests, and districts are drawn such that happens for a reason. So there are competitive districts, there are always going to be surprises, but I think the political media seizes on moments of surprise, like Lauren Boebert defeating a Republican white incumbent in Colorado earlier this cycle, and hallmarks that as some massive structural change heralding the end of segregation, and that's just not what this looks like across 535 seats. So I just encourage people to view those sort of exceptions in context, and to view the diverse Republican field and the diverse Democratic field also in context, because the Democrats are just as guilty of running people who look like the incumbent that's retiring to replace the Republican that's retiring as the Republicans are. So, change is slow. That happens for both geographic and demographic reasons, and also I think for reasons related to sort of the party's financing and the types of candidates that they encourage to run in those districts. And I know I'm kind of rambling, but one of my favorite, sort of tragically favorite races this cycle, well, several races this cycle, have been in North Carolina. And North Carolina was forced to redistrict many of their districts in the last 4 years because of gerrymandering concerns. And in doing so, those redistricting changes resulted in 2 white male Republicans retiring because their districts went from being solidly Republican ones to more competitive ones. The Democrats ran all women, a slate of all women in those primaries, 2 white women and 2 Black women, 1 per each seat. And in both races, the white women outraised the Black women, and in both races, the white women defeated the Black women. And these districts actually, surprisingly, are not all white. They're not all white districts. There's no reason why you would expect there to be a white candidate running. In fact, many districts that have high proportions of Black Americans, you would expect there to be a Black candidate representing them. That's how those districts work. And yet we saw in those Democratic primaries, the white candidate defeat the Black candidate. So I think that even when the structural changes hand the party an opportunity to diversify across both gender and racial lines, it doesn't necessarily happen in the way that would be most most of an achievement for equality. So I think that's just something to consider when looking at these elections. And I encourage everyone to check out the reporting on those issues.
That report sounds very interesting and like a great read. So I second that encouragement that everyone should read that after this webinar. Looking at the increasing diversity within the slate of Republican and Democratic candidates, especially with Republican women, 2018 saw a 25-year low for Republican women elected to Congress. And part of this was because they were unable to make it out of their primaries, unfortunately. And following that, Elise Stefanik started a leadership PAC called EPAC, which we go over a bit in our PAC report. So I encourage you to learn more about EPAC from that report as well. And it aims to recruit, endorse, and fund Republican women candidates in their primaries to improve their numbers in the general election. And I know, Rena, you've been the co-founder and have been involved in several PACs which are geared towards increasing the number of Republican women. Do you think, or how do you think this is going to impact the overall Republican diversity within the Republican caucus in 2020 and beyond? How long do you think these PACs are going to have to kind of really work hard and forcefully fund candidates until this just becomes second nature and it is always happening that the number of women and the number of people of color are increasing within the caucus?
Well, I'm looking down my phone because I've been a supporter of EPAC, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik's PAC. And it's important to note that she started it by transforming her own leadership PAC towards electing women. So to some of us who've been involved in sort of Republican women's world efforts, whether they be nonprofit organizations or PACs, it was a little bit unsettling for that PAC to get all the glory as if she had done something so novel. Because, hey, look, that's great. She did it. I think it was a good effort. I think it remains a good effort. I'm just pulling up her most recent memo here that they've shared publicly, and I'd like to give you the top lines here, and one of them is that they laid out their goals, and one of their goals is to raise, bundle, and donate over 1 million to Republican women this year. They would increase the net number of Republican women members of the U.S. House by the end of the 2020 cycle. They would continue to help Republican women dominate national fundraising across the board, lead the Republican Party's efforts to gain back House seats with EPAC-endorsed candidates. So look, I mean, these are really ambitious goals, not very different from what other Republican PACs. This cycle, though, Congresswoman Stefanik has raised over $200,000 for other Republican women through digital efforts within the last 2 months alone. Donated over $450,000 to female candidates and committees which are supporting them. So, and bundled an additional $100,000 for female candidates. These are good things, but is this going to really move the needle? I actually really don't think so, because I think when this launched, I had hoped that 4 other Republican incumbent members of the U.S. House would do the very same thing with their own PACs. That is not being done, and so, you know, Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman, is proud that this cycle she has raised, bundled, and donated over 750,000 Republican women candidates, but it's just not enough. The mountain that these Republican female candidates are facing is almost a little bit, actually, it's almost insurmountable, I'll say, until the NRCC decides to have an actual plan for Republican female candidates. So in my role on Right Now Women PAC, I was this candidate engagement director. I was introduced to the Women's Coalition director at the NRCC. That was in 2017. And she said, I'm going to give you the briefs. I'm going to give you, something to take back to your board members about the status of each of these women's races, but we will not be involved in any way to help. Even if a woman is the only woman in that entire race, we will not help her because we don't want to differentiate between a man and a woman that's a Republican running against each other. And so when there's a lack of commitment, which I mentioned before, that is an issue. So I really do believe it becomes a grass tops issue. People like me, political operatives, have to go around the country almost evangelizing the importance of getting younger conservative women to understand why it's important for them to invest even $50 in EPAC or, Right Now Women PAC, Maggie's List. Winning for Women was something that started with a very money gentleman whose name I'm blanking on right now. Sarah could probably remind me. I don't want to say the wrong name. Annie Dickerson was the head over there. The Winning for Women is still in existence. Actually, they're very nascent still. These groups, I think, they all take a slightly different approach to female candidates, especially in this era of President Trump. And my sense was that we're not making much improvement. We're not making many gains with really getting more Republican women elected when we're in such a divisive moment where literally the conversation is constantly taken up by, do you support the president or do you not support the president? And then we can talk further. That's kind of what it's come to for conservative women. So it's actually taken us a couple steps back. So again, grass tops effort, political operatives like myself, we need to go out there and evangelize locally to these local parties of bringing women in and changing the gatekeepers. They can't be old white men anymore. There's nothing wrong with old white men. I love many of them. This country has so many of them. But we want to have an electorate that is reflective. Our democracy is not reflective enough, right? And so we need younger women, conservative women in the electorate to step up and say, let me figure out how to just get my foot in the door. And anybody listening that's at all involved or interested in getting involved in any way, it's as simple as doing the stuff I did. There was Concord 51 PAC in DC. I decided to chair it. That was sort of the younger policy person. A lot of us former Hill staffers, administration people, we came together, created that PAC. We had a lot of support from the UPS PAC, yes, the United Parcel Service. There was that. And then I did Republican Indian Committee PAC at some point. I'm of Indian ancestry. It was important to me that we get more conservative Indians involved in politics, because I had seen that overwhelmingly they were Democrats. I was a spokesperson there. Next Gen GOP, that was the PAC we had here in Virginia. I was a spokesperson there because we were trying to trying to get Virginia to be more red. This was many years ago, might I remind you. So my efforts were truly volunteer because I am more of an activist more than I am anything else now in this phase of my life. An activist, the best matchup is to just go and volunteer in these PACs. Get to know who the movers and shakers are. Oftentimes your proximity to an elected member of Congress, as Sarah mentioned earlier, it's very quick to be able to meet one when you're involved in a PAC. So to me, that proximity to power is a great way for people to really see the process, whether they want to go on and become a candidate at some point themselves or have influence on the process themselves.
I just want to add too to that, which I think Rena makes some excellent points. I think that a lot of the quote unquote moderate or liberal focused women's groups sort of assume that you can apply the same formula on the conservative side to getting people to care about electing women. And Rena mentioned this earlier. And I think there's been some good academic work about how Republican voters, women included, don't necessarily care that a woman is representing them. It doesn't sort of drive them to vote for the woman in the same way that it might drive a Democrat to vote for a woman. I think that when these issues, when sort of increasing equality is spoken about in terms of like women get things done, women are more effective lawmakers, women XYZ, sort of what are the consequences of having more women in office. I think that can ultimately be more motivating. And then I think there's also, and I've noticed this because we look at all of these candidate pages when we're trying to get their contact information to contact them, and also to see if they mention their race anywhere on their sort of campaign materials, which people of color tend to do and white people tend to not do. We've seen that women who are running in very conservative districts in the primaries, I think almost universally, they've framed themselves as being pro-Trump and anti-squad. That phrase, anti-squad, has been used almost, I'd say almost pretty universally among people running in conservative districts who are female. And I think that that's really, really interesting to sort of highlight both kind of the ideological perspective that they're bringing to the table, ally themselves with Trump, and not run as a quote unquote like more moderate candidate, sort of saying women can run to the right of men and that's okay. Like we can allow that, but the reason why we would elect women isn't because they're necessarily more moderate, or isn't because womenness means a certain set of sort of beliefs around a certain set of issues, but rather kind of diversity can mean reflectiveness of the population. It can mean new perspectives. It can mean sort of a higher sort of work ethic. It can mean change, just sort of diversifying for the point of diversifying, getting new bodies in. We've had, like Rena mentioned, white men serving our country for centuries, and see how that's gotten us so far. Just have to look around. And so I think that sort of the framing, the messaging, and allowing women whose beliefs might be completely antithetical to ours to the table is an important way of drawing in other women and people of color and women of color to discuss these issues without it being so strictly partisan, which I feel like is what happened in 2018. And I think that's problematic.
Those were excellent points, Sarah. I completely echo everything you're saying. You reminded me of a couple of things I want to mention before our conversation wraps up. In any way, it's in any scenario, any woman listening to this, it's so important to recognize that we have not come very far when it comes to women being able to fund their own campaigns. Because I think also one thing I've seen, and this is very true of myself, I get asked, do you want to run, Rena? You've been in politics a long time in many different ways. Do you want to run? And I said, culturally, my parents were immigrants from Uganda and from India. And they came over here, and this idea of taking government help, of assistance, was just so foreign to them. They didn't want to do it. It's actually very much baked into my community. We take great pride in lifting each other up and lifting ourselves up, but if we don't have to take government assistance, we don't want to take it. Asking someone else for money is difficult for my community. And ethnically. So I'm very much, I always say I'm as American as apple pie. I was born in the southern coal fields of West Virginia. So it's kind of hard for me to say my community, but I realized that actually that attitude made its way into me from my parents, that I have a really hard time asking other people for money. And particularly when it's to prop myself up, And so I do see that in a lot of the female candidates. I've unfortunately not been able, over my career in the past 9 years of political consulting, have not been able to work with many women. I've advised over 25 candidates, issues, initiatives, but the women on my roster have been so few, and the very few that I've had, it seems like raising money is very difficult because for conservative women, first of all, it's tougher to get them to the public sphere at a younger age. Usually they want to wait until they're done with education, their kids are out of the house, or whatever it may be. So we're seeing an older candidate, and I've been a little disappointed by that. Again, I'm always happy when any woman of any age, of any stripes, comes to the table. And that reminds me, there's a great comment in the chat asking if I work with Republican Women for Progress. And actually should have mentioned I'm on the board of directors for Republican Women for Progress. We are a 501c4 organization. I'm really proud of that group. They originated as Republican Women for Hillary, but I've joined them in this new iteration over the past couple of years. But RWFP made a decision, I believe it was early last year or maybe the year before, the leadership decided to create a PAC. And the PAC actually ended up funding some Democrat women. And so that was a criticism I heard on the right, was how could they? How could they be giving to Democrat women? And I said, actually, for those of us involved in this world, to me, we have not reached a critical mass of women for those bad actors to get filtered out, you know, the people we don't want to see elected to Congress. I think what we agree on is that the more women we bring to the table of any stripe, any political stripe across the political spectrum, the better it is for our democracy right now. So that was sort of my argument to other women, is that, like, don't have a problem with these women supporting Democrat women. If they find something that they think this woman is doing that makes her, I hate the word, but viable, you know, easy to get elected, if she deserves it, if they find that she deserves it, if they believe that, then why shouldn't they put their money where their mouth is? Because again, we are just in this moment where there's not enough early money to get these women out. And so again, I applaud efforts by sitting members of Congress like Elise Stefanik, but you know, I also now have a little bit of an issue with her politics. I've been sort of, unfortunately, faced a brunt of being an anti-Trump Republican woman. I've actually been asked if I'm even a Republican. I said, well, if I want to see more conservative women elected, does it matter whether I support the person in the Oval Office right now or not? And I think so. So it's incumbent upon each of us to realize the influence of money. I'm seeing attitudes change with younger Republicans on the influence of Citizens United. That's been really encouraging to me. I'm, like I said, I'm under 40 myself, and my views on that have changed a great deal. The views on gerrymandering, these are important conversations to have, because the minute you are a member of a PAC, I believe, or volunteer for it, you have this opportunity to start doing certain things. And I think super PACs are great. Lincoln Project's one of them that has been putting out these incredible ads. If that's something you can create and do, bring people together to do those kind of functions, that is just so important. So thank you for letting me get that bit in, because these are just sort of important notes to me that I think I've learned over the past couple of years of really getting more involved as an activist. To me, that's where I've had the greatest influence and the greatest joy as a Republican activist, because I'm able to really make a difference by handing a woman a check or making the case for her.
Wonderful. I think that really gets us to kind of the conclusion of our conversation, which is the role of political gatekeepers. And I think we often think of political parties and groups that recruit, train, and endorse women and PACs as these major gatekeepers for who gets elected into office or who even runs in the first place. I think Represent Women as a whole really wants to emphasize that, yes, those are the major gatekeepers, and they need to be kind of targeted to encourage more women to run and recruit more women to run. But we as individuals can also be minor gatekeepers in and of itself and call on these larger gatekeepers to really make a difference. And some of the conclusions we came to in our report and our recommendations for PACs and individual donors was to, for one, for PACs to set targets to fund more women and give women more, and raise those targets every cycle until parity is reached. And as members of PACs or members of the community or just people, we can call on major PACs and the PACs we're members of and major donors to actually set these targets and then hold them responsible to these targets. Going forward, some of our other recommendations include individual donors should set targets as well, even if you're just giving small amounts of money to multiple candidates, whether it's you just want to fund candidates that you could vote for potentially, or you want to fund candidates across the country or in a different district to your own. Set targets for yourself of the number of women you want to support and the amount of money you want to give to women every cycle. And this goes especially for high impact donors. And I think people we would often consider celebrities who get very involved in politics is to publicize their commitment to women candidates across the ideological spectrum, so that they really do set an example for how individual donors can make a difference. And finally, we want the public to hold PACs responsible for the money that they are donating, especially if you are a member of a membership PAC. And our communications and outreach team have actually created some amazing graphics from the case studies Corinne has done, which kind of call out, the major ones of Twitter, Google, Amazon for the amount of money they're giving to men versus women. And then Nicole, did you want to go over kind of the action steps people can take after this webinar and beyond our reports?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, everyone who has spoken. I know there also are a couple of questions that are kind of spread out through the chat, so I don't know if people want to kind of look over them, and we can answer some at the end of explaining our action steps. So these are just a couple that we came up with that we think individuals can do on their own. And so our first one is holding PACs accountable by withholding donation gifts to PACs for the ones that fail to support enough women candidates, and then rewarding the PACs that set and reach targets for the number of women candidates that they support. We have a lot of sort of handouts and posts about PAC contributions that are meant to like raise awareness of where, as we said, companies like Google, Twitter, and Facebook, like where they put their money. And these links will also all be sent out to everyone, and most of this information should just be easy also to find on our webpage. Another big thing, which I think goes for sort of any form of taking action politically, is always contacting your elected officials, especially ones that are up for re-election. They need to know sort of what the people, of course, obviously want, and the more emails or calls that they're getting about the same sort of buzzword. So if it is a lot of people contacting their representatives about like, we're very interested in PACs, and they'll see a larger number of like emails specifically about this, and it'll be something that they hopefully would want to address. Our handouts and even the PACs report can also be used as guides to give talks to organizations or clubs, or even just in general, like following our social media and reposting it, especially as there's like a lot of movements going on right now. I think they can be used to sort of spread awareness to all demographics also, which is really important, and a lot of different age groups. And this information also will be sent out. So I don't know if there are some questions.
Yeah, I've just been looking through, and I'll throw out the questions I find in the chat to the whole panel. One is from, I'm sorry if I mispronounce anyone's name, not my best. My pronunciations aren't always good. From Marani Velasquez, where can we find information on PAC's key issues to know if a candidate may be aligned with them for potential funding? And is there a resource that outlines the key issues from some PACs, especially ones mentioned here today? I know Open Secrets does collect all the information from PAC giving, so you can often find the names of these PACs, and usually a quick Google search will lead you to their homepage and what they might necessarily believe in or why they fund certain candidates.
Yeah, we don't have, I'm not aware of any comprehensive data source that contains information about a PAC's platform. And many PACs are restricted in who they can take money from. You can't donate to Comcast's PAC, for example, unless you work for Comcast or are on their board. So that sort of eliminates part of them. But for the ones that are open kind of to general donations, I think they tend to be pretty public about what their positions are. On Open Secrets, you can sort of filter through a variety of PAC data sets. I think the link that I sent and then was forwarded with PAC information is kind of our main area where you would learn about that data. But you can see on any given PAC's profile who they are giving money to. So that can be kind of a proxy for what they might sort of what their take on things might be. And then also there should be a list of who's donating to them. So generally, again, those are mostly people who are affiliated with the PAC in some way, but it also can, you can find information about people who might be supportive of the PAC's point of view. So I urge you to check out that. But if you're interested in something specifically, I think that the PAC's own page is probably going to be your best source for learning about what they stand for.
Wonderful. Another question from Stephanie Sharp. Have you seen any tactics which have been more successful in driving primary turnout for Republicans? I'm not an expert on this, nor have I done any research, but I don't know if anyone on the panel has ideas on that.
Yeah, I don't know of anything that in terms of turnout, no.
Yeah, neither do I. Sorry if we couldn't answer your question. I believe that was all the questions in the chat. If someone has any of the attendees have a quick question they want to put in right now. If not, I want to thank everyone for attending and all of our panelists for taking part and really bringing their expertise and knowledge to all of us, especially in this webinar format, which isn't always the easiest to negotiate.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. The registration link for the last two talks is the same one as the one for today, but that'll also be sent out to everyone. And we'd really appreciate and encourage everyone to be as active as you can, sort of on social media, not just on the issues that we're talking about here, but just in general. I think that as we're managing and still even shifting over to doing so much remote work and like who knows how long, unfortunately, we'll be doing this for, I think it helps more than people realize. Even reposting something about something you care about or something you want to, you know, let any of your followers or your own friends, family members know about, like even having one other person be more aware is always like a huge difference to make.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. And I think we'll end the webinar there for today. Do register for our future webinars, and you can find a complete list of what the topics are from our social media. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.